Have you ever fallen for someone who was never really yours? Not officially, not completely, but they lived inside you long after they were gone. This is a story about that kind of love and the stillness you must find on the other side. He met her on an ordinary Thursday, one of those quiet days where nothing was meant to change. She walked in late to a shared meeting, hair slightly messy from the wind, and smiled as if she had known the room long before she stepped into it. There was nothing dramatic about their first conversation. No sparks, no slow-motion glances, just a few words, a laugh, and the strange sense that something unspoken had already begun. He didn't know what it was. He wasn't the kind of man who fell easily. He was rational, measured, grounded. But with her, things began to shift, subtly at first, like the tide retreating half an inch more than usual. Days turned into conversations. Conversations turned into quiet rituals. Coffee breaks that lasted a little too long, texts exchanged late into the night, lingering eye contact across crowded rooms. She wasn't his, not in the way people belong to each other, but he began to carry her with him, in thoughts, in small decisions, in the way silence felt heavier when she wasn't around. He never said the words, neither did she. But desire doesn't need permission. It takes root in the space between logic and longing. He began to change. He noticed himself hesitating before speaking to other women. He checked his phone too often. He caught himself analyzing every word she said, looking for hidden meaning in casual messages. He imagined a life, a possibility that had never been promised. And then one day, it ended. Not with cruelty, not with closure, just distance. She met someone else. She smiled differently now. The text slowed. The silences grew, and eventually there was nothing left but absence. It should have been simple. They were never really together. No commitment, no heartbreak, at least not officially. But grief doesn't need a label, and pain doesn't ask if it's appropriate. He spent the following weeks in a haze. Work felt meaningless. Sleep was shallow. Meals were tasteless. It wasn't just the loss of her. It was the loss of who he had become in the presence of desire. The collapse of a secret world he had quietly built around the fantasy of her. Sometimes he cursed himself for being foolish. Other times he missed her so intensely that he ached physically. And in his darkest moments he almost reached out, wanting just a fragment of what once was, even if it was never truly his to begin with. One night, unable to sleep, he turned to an old book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He had read it before years ago, back when life felt simpler. But now the words hit differently. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He paused, closed the book, sat in silence. That night he wrote a single line in his journal. This isn't about her. This is about what I lost in myself. From that moment on, something began to shift. Not all at once. Healing never happens in clean lines. But there was now a sense of direction. A reason not to sink. Each time he felt the urge to check her social media, he paused. Each time he replayed old conversations in his mind, he observed rather than indulged. Each time he missed her, he reminded himself, missing is natural, chasing is optional. He began to rebuild himself. He woke early, not because he wanted to, but because discipline felt like a rope anchoring him to sanity. He trained his body, lifting not just weights but the invisible heaviness that had settled in his chest. He returned to journaling, not to vent, but to clarify. He meditated, not to empty the mind, but to sharpen his awareness of what stirred within it. And gradually he realized he was not trying to get over her. He was trying to return to himself. There were setbacks. There were nights where loneliness came like a flood, and he stood alone in its rising waters. There were dreams in which she returned, said the words she never said, and then disappeared again upon waking. There were moments where even Stoicism felt too rigid, too cold for the warmth he still carried in his chest. But he stayed the course. He read Epictetus. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. And he challenged those judgments. Was she truly the answer to his happiness? Was her absence truly the source of his pain? Or was it simply that he had tied too much of his worth to being wanted, desired, needed? That realization stung, but it also freed him. One rainy afternoon, he sat by a window watching drops race down the glass. He remembered how she once told him that rain made her feel alive, and instead of hurting, he smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a resigned one, but something softer, wiser. He didn't hate her, he didn't worship her, he simply saw her as she was, a passing figure in his story. Beautiful, yes, but temporary. And he was no longer chasing the fleeting, he was tending to what endured. He no longer needed validation in someone else's gaze. He had started to recognize himself again, not in the mirror, but in his choices, in the quiet strength of saying no to what once consumed him. He learned that self-mastery is not cold detachment. It is deep presence. It is loving without possession, desiring without dependency, letting go without bitterness. He never told her what she meant to him, not because he was afraid, but because he understood. Some things are meant to remain unsaid, not because they are untrue, but because they are complete without being spoken. And maybe, if she ever thought of him, she'd feel it, not in words, but in the silence they once shared, in the stillness between them. That stillness, it wasn't emptiness, it was the space where he rebuilt himself. And now, when he walks alone through the streets of the city, there is no more ache, only a quiet reverence for what was, and a steady loyalty to who he's become. Because peace, he learned, is not found in another's eyes. It's built, choice by choice, breath by breath, in the sacred silence where you finally choose yourself.